Hello, first grade. I hope that you are doing well. As you notice, springtime is well underway, and I hope you've been out enjoying the warm weather. One of the things you might be noticing associated with the warmer weather is there are more animals outside right now. And there's several reasons why there are a lot more animals outside in the springtime, and I want to talk about one of those reasons today, and that is something called hibernation. In spring, a lot of animals come out of hibernation, where they have been all winter, and then we start to see them running around. So I want to tell you today what hibernation is and give you some examples of animals that hibernate. So first off, I've been using this word hibernation, but what does it mean? As you may guess by the little Z's I have in the corner of this screen, hibernation is basically a great big nap that animals take in the wintertime. So a lot of animals throughout the entire wintertime, they sleep. They don't get out and go sledding or do anything in the snow. They just sleep, and usually underground or hidden in a log or something like that. So hibernation is when an animal sleeps through the entire winter. So when an animal sleeps through the whole winter, that's called hibernation. They hibernate is another way of saying it. Here is a picture of a bear that is hibernating. Now this bear, she looks like she has dug a tunnel underground, and you can see she's surrounded by dirt, and maybe there's some leaves down in there, and there's roots, and she's going to spend the entire winter down in that little hole, sleeping. In some ways that sounds kind of nice, doesn't it, to take a nice long nap that takes the entire winter? So it sounds kind of nice, but why do animals hibernate? That's a good question for us to ask. Why would an animal want to sleep for months on end? Other than it just being relaxing, there are actually some good reasons for hibernating. So if you look at this picture I have here, you can see a nice forest in the wintertime. And I want you to think as though you are an animal right now. So imagine you're a bear or some other animal that might hibernate. And all of a sudden it is winter and you're looking around. Well, what do animals spend a lot of their time doing? They spend a lot of their time looking for food. And if you're a bear, you're going to be looking for actually mostly things like berries and plants to eat, but bears also eat meat as well. So you'll be looking around for food, but then you might notice in the wintertime there just isn't quite as much food out on the trees. The berries aren't in season when there's snow on the ground. So if you are looking at this picture, there's not really a whole lot for wild animals to eat in the forest. And plus, it's also very cold, so if you were to go out into the forest in the wintertime, you'll probably start shivering before too long because it's very cold and your body has to spend extra energy to keep yourself warm by shivering. So the reason animals hibernate is that if they were awake in the winter, they'd waste a lot of energy looking for food and staying warm. And they'd probably spend more energy than they would find in the food that they were able to find. So it actually makes a lot of sense for them to sleep, because when they sleep, what they do is they actually they lower their heart rate and they lower their body temperature a little bit, so they don't have to spend very much energy to keep their body running. So during hibernation, an animal will lower its heart rate and temperature, and it saves a lot of energy that way. That way it can get through the entire winter without dying, really. It's able to use the energy that it has stored up in its body to get it through. If it were awake, it would be spending a lot more energy because it'd be shivering, trying to keep warm, and running around looking for food, and there's not much of the food, so that's why they like to hibernate. Another thing you'll notice some animals doing before hibernation is they'll actually eat a lot. So in the fall, during harvest time, when all the berries are plentiful and there's food everywhere, a lot of animals will stock up and they'll eat a ton of food and get really fat. And by getting really fat, all that fat is energy that they can then use in the wintertime to keep themselves warm. So it acts like a layer, almost like a blanket around them, but then also they can burn that fat to make energy while they sleep. So that is why animals hibernate. It's to get them through the winter without dying. Now, I'm going to give you some examples of several animals that hibernate and tell you how they do that. The first one is the bear, which we talked about earlier. So the bear, coming up upon fall, it'll eat and eat and eat and eat and get real fat, and then it'll go into a nice little den, kind of a little cave area that's dug out in the ground. And she'll go down in there and sleep. And it stays there all winter. And It's a nice kind of fun little place. Sometimes you can find videos of people who stick video cameras into bear dens, which sounds like a dangerous thing to do. But if they're sleeping and you don't wake them, then I guess you're fine. You can see they have lots of room in there, and sometimes you might have several bears, like maybe a mama bear and her cubs could be in there, so you can have fun stuff like that. Okay, next example is a turtle. It's another example of an animal that hibernates during the winter. Now, turtles, there's different kinds of turtles. There's turtles that live on land, like this box turtle here. There's also turtles that live in the water, like a painted turtle. And they hibernate a little bit differently. The turtle that lives on land will dig a nice little hole and go bury itself down in the hole and sleep there in the winter. Like this box turtle, he's actually just coming out of a hibernation hole. Just dig a hole in some soft dirt and get down a little ways. Then they can be protected from the snow and the ice and all of that. But other turtles, they actually hibernate underwater. What they'll do is they'll dig down and bury themselves in the mud at the bottom of a lake, and that is where they sleep for the winter. So turtles, depending on the kind of turtle, hibernate a little bit differently. And it's actually kind of similar to the last kind of animals that I want to talk about, and that is frogs and toads. And as you might guess, frog and toad in your story of Frog and Toad are the animal frog and the animal toad, so they hibernate as well. So if I remember correctly, I haven't read it in a long time, but I think there's a story where Frog goes to wake Toad up from hibernation and Toad wants to stay sleeping. I think I remember that correctly from when I've read Frog and Toad. Yeah, but frogs and toads, they hibernate as well. They like to dig themselves a little hole and they go to sleep for the winter. So toads, being that they live on land mostly, if you remember from our last lesson, they'll usually find some dirt and they'll bury themselves down in it. And frogs, the kind of frogs that live in the water anyways, they'll actually go down and spend their winters on the bottom of the lake. Now here's a fun fact for you. There are some kinds of frogs, like the wood frog, that can actually pretty much freeze solid and they can still be alive. They actually have what's called like an antifreeze. So they have chemicals in their body that keeps certain important things from freezing all the way. But they stop breathing and their heart stops beating and they can basically look dead. But then when spring comes around, they can thaw out, they get warm, and then they can go hopping on their way. So God gave them that very special ability to freeze and still be able to live. I'm kind of glad that I can stay warmer than that when I sleep. Yeah, but some frogs will also hibernate in logs as well, if they're the kind that stay on land more. So they can either burrow in the ground, or under a lake, or in a log. And it might be fun to think about the differences between Frog and Toad in your book, which is a fiction story, so it's made up, versus frogs and toads in real life. Because there's some similarities and differences, and it's kind of fun to kind of picture if Frog and Toad were a real Frog and Toad, how would the story look a little bit different? Or if real frogs and toads wore clothes and talked like Frog and Toad in the book, how would things be different? So you can use your imagination for that. But anyways, that's all I have right now for our lesson on hibernation. So it's just a great big nap that animals take to get them through the winter, because they don't have enough food and it's cold out. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I hope you enjoy reading more about the adventures of Frog and Toad. Take care.